The investigation into the mystery of the four friends and their 1990 camping trip had reached a turning point. As Detective Martinez and his team analyzed the thermal drone footage captured by the hunters 17 years later, they began to piece together a timeline that defied everything they thought they knew about the case. The drone's thermal imaging had revealed something extraordinary. Deep in the forest, nearly 3 miles from where the friends had originally set up camp, the heat signatures showed what appeared to be human activity. But this wasn't recent activity, the forensics team determined after analyzing the vegetation patterns and soil displacement. Someone had been using this location for years, possibly decades. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead forensic anthropologist brought in from the State University, carefully examined the enhanced thermal footage frame by frame. The patterns were unmistakable. This wasn't a random campsite or temporary shelter. The thermal readings indicated a permanent structure, carefully concealed beneath layers of natural camouflage. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the evidence of recent disturbance. The hunter's drone had captured the thermal signatures just days after someone had clearly been moving through the area. Fresh footprints, barely visible in the enhanced footage, suggested that whoever was responsible for the friend's disappearance might still be active in the region. Detective Martinez assembled his team for what would become the most extensive search operation in the county's history. They couldn't afford to wait. If someone was still out there, still using this remote location, they needed to act quickly before the trail went cold again. The search party consisted of 12 officers, 2 K-9 units, and a team of specialized forensic technicians. They moved through the dense forest at dawn, following GPS coordinates derived from the thermal drone footage. The terrain was brutal, thick with undergrowth and fallen logs that made progress painfully slow. Officer Rebecca Hayes, leading the K-9 unit, was the first to notice the smell. It wasn't the typical forest scent of decomposing leaves and damp earth. This was something else entirely, something that made her German Shepherd, Rex, immediately alert and agitated. As they pushed deeper into the woods, following the increasingly strong scent, the team began to uncover signs of human habitation. Crude trail markers, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, guided them toward what appeared to be a natural depression in the landscape. The structure they found was unlike anything they'd encountered in previous investigations. Built into the side of a hill and covered with decades of accumulated vegetation, it was nearly invisible from ground level. Only the thermal drone's advanced sensors had been able to detect the heat signatures emanating from within. Detective Martinez approached the concealed entrance cautiously, his weapon drawn. The wooden door, weathered and camouflaged with moss and bark, stood slightly ajar. A faint but distinct odor emanated from within, a mixture of decay and something else that made his stomach turn. Inside, the structure was larger than it appeared from the outside. The walls were lined with rough-hewn timber, and the floor was packed dirt, mixed with what appeared to be sawdust. But it was the contents of the room that made the entire search team freeze in horror. Personal belongings were arranged along makeshift shelves. Clothing, jewelry, identification cards, and photographs, all carefully preserved and organized. Some items were clearly recent, while others showed signs of decades of age. The collection spanned years, possibly going back to the 1970s. Among the items, Detective Martinez found what they'd been searching for: A University of Oregon sweatshirt, faded but recognizable, bearing the name David written in permanent marker on the tag. A pair of hiking boots, size 10, with distinctive wear patterns that match the plaster casts taken from the original campsite. A wallet containing the driver's license of Michael Thompson, one of the 4 friends who'd vanished in 1990. Dr. Chen began documenting each item with meticulous care. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about the 4 friends from 1990. This was evidence of a serial predator who had been operating in the area for decades, collecting trophies from multiple victims. The most disturbing discovery came when Officer Hayes and Rex investigated a secondary chamber deeper within the structure. Hidden behind a false wall, they found what appeared to be a makeshift laboratory, preserved biological samples, detailed journals filled with observations, and photographs that documented the predator's activities over the years. The journals were particularly chilling. Written in a precise, almost clinical handwriting, they described a methodical approach to selecting and stalking victims. The author had been studying the camping patterns of visitors to the area, learning their routines, and identifying opportunities to strike. The entry dated September 15th, 1990, made Detective Martinez's blood run cold. It described in detail the 4 friends' camping trip, their exact location, and the predator's plan to isolate them from potential rescue. The clinical detachment of the writing was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all, but the journals contained more than just historical records. Recent entries, some dated within the past few months, indicated that the predator was still active. References to new subjects and updated surveillance techniques suggested that the investigation had uncovered an ongoing threat to public safety. Detective Martinez immediately called for additional backup and contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. This was no longer a cold case about 4 missing friends. This was an active investigation into what appeared to be one of the most prolific serial predators in the region's history. As the search team continued to process the scene, they made another discovery that would reshape their understanding of the case. In a locked metal box, they found a collection of videotapes, each carefully labeled with dates and locations. The earliest tape was dated 1978, the most recent just 3 months ago. The realization that they were dealing with a predator who had been operating for over 4 decades sent shockwaves through the investigation. How many victims had there been? How had someone managed to operate undetected for so long? And most critically, where was the predator now? Dr. Chen's analysis of the physical evidence suggested that the structure had been abandoned recently, possibly within the past few weeks. The thermal signatures detected by the hunter's drone were likely the predator's final visits to the site, perhaps to retrieve or destroy evidence. The discovery of the hidden structure marked the beginning of the most intensive manhunt in the county's history. But even as law enforcement mobilized to track down the predator, questions remained about the fate of the 4 friends and the dozens of other victims whose belongings filled the makeshift museum of horrors. Detective Martinez stood outside the concealed structure as the sun began to set, watching as forensic technicians carefully cataloged each piece of evidence. 17 years after the 4 friends had vanished during their camping trip, the thermal drone footage had finally provided the breakthrough they needed. But the investigation was far from over. Somewhere out there, A predator who had evaded capture for decades was still free, and time was running out to prevent him from claiming more victims. The hunter's thermal drone had captured more than just heat signatures in the forest. It had exposed a web of predation and violence that stretched back decades, transforming a missing persons case into one of the most significant criminal investigations in the region's history. As night fell over the forest, the search for answers was just beginning. As the manhunt intensified, investigators uncovered layers of deception that stretched back decades. The seized videotapes revealed a disturbing pattern of escalation. The earliest recordings from 1978 showed simple documentation of victims, but as the years progressed, the footage became increasingly elaborate, suggesting the predator had grown bolder and more methodical with each passing year. Detective Martinez led the forensic analysis team through the evidence. Each tape was meticulously cataloged, cross-referenced with missing persons reports, and analyzed for geographical markers that might reveal additional locations. The technical quality of the recordings improved dramatically over time, indicating the predator had invested significantly in documenting their crimes. The journals provided even more chilling insights. Written in cramped, obsessive handwriting, they detailed not just the crimes themselves, but the psychological preparation that preceded each incident. The predator had studied their victims for months before striking, learning their routines, their vulnerabilities, their family structures. The level of planning was staggering. One journal entry from 1985 described a failed attempt to abduct a family from Oregon. The predator had spent weeks preparing, but abandoned the plan when the family unexpectedly changed their camping location. The entry revealed frustration, but also a disturbing patience, noting that there would be other opportunities with different families. The most recent entries were perhaps the most unsettling. They referenced new technologies, social media platforms, and modern communication methods that could be used to identify and track potential victims. The predator had adapted with the times, using online forums and camping websites to research families planning remote trips. Detective Harrison coordinated with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to develop a comprehensive profile. The predator was likely someone with extensive outdoor experience, possibly with a background in forestry, park services, or military training. They had the skills to survive off-grid for extended periods, and the knowledge to navigate remote wilderness areas without detection. The search teams expanded their efforts, focusing on a network of hidden camps and supply caches scattered across multiple states. Each location revealed evidence of long-term occupation, sophisticated camouflage, and stockpiled supplies that could sustain someone for months. The predator had created an invisible infrastructure spanning hundreds of miles of wilderness. Local law enforcement agencies received bulletins describing the suspect's methods and possible appearance. The few witness accounts that existed described a figure of medium height with graying hair, often wearing military surplus clothing and carrying a large backpack. The description was frustratingly generic, fitting thousands of outdoorsmen across the region. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired postal worker in Montana contacted authorities after seeing news coverage of the case. She remembered delivering packages to a remote post office box for over 20 years, always to the same alias found in the predator's journals. The packages often contained camping equipment, electronics, and photography supplies. The post office box led investigators to a small mountain town where the predator had maintained a legitimate identity for decades. Under this false name, they had worked seasonal jobs, rented storage units, and even participated in local search and rescue operations. The cruel irony was devastating. The predator had helped search for some of their own victims. The storage units contained a horrifying archive. Hundreds of photographs, detailed maps marking victim locations, and personal items taken as trophies. Among the evidence were belongings from the four friends who had disappeared in 1990, confirming their worst fears about the fate of those young men. But the most chilling discovery was a detailed plan for future crimes. The predator had identified several families through their online activity, researching their camping preferences and planned trips. The level of digital surveillance was sophisticated, involving multiple fake social media accounts and elaborate deception schemes. The investigation revealed that the predator had been planning to disappear entirely, possibly moving their operations to a different region or even another country. Recent financial records showed large cash withdrawals and the purchase of survival equipment suitable for extended wilderness living. As winter approached, the search took on new urgency. The predator's experience and preparation meant they could survive harsh conditions that would defeat most fugitives. Search teams worked around the clock, using thermal imaging and advanced tracking technology to scan vast areas of wilderness. The community response was overwhelming. Thousands of volunteers joined the search efforts, while others provided supplies and support to the search teams. The case had touched a nerve, representing every parent's worst nightmare about the dangers lurking in places that should be safe and natural. Media coverage intensified international attention. Similar cases from other countries were re-examined, with investigators exploring the possibility that the predator might have connections to international criminal networks. The sophistication of the operation suggested resources and knowledge that went beyond a single individual. The psychological impact on the investigators was severe. Many had to undergo counseling to process the horrific evidence they had uncovered. The case challenged their understanding of human evil and the lengths to which some individuals would go to satisfy their twisted desires. As the search continued, one fact remained clear. Somewhere in the vast wilderness, a predator with decades of experience was still free, still dangerous, and still capable of striking again. The race against time had become a battle for the safety of every family who sought refuge in the natural world. The investigation had revealed not just a single crime, but an entire hidden world of predation that had operated in the shadows for generations. The full scope of the horror was still being uncovered, with each new piece of evidence revealing deeper layers of calculated evil. The task force assembled at dawn on the ridge overlooking the predator's last known location. Agent Martinez adjusted his earpiece, scanning the tree line through high-powered binoculars. The community response had been unprecedented. Local hunters, search and rescue volunteers, and even retired military personnel had joined the operation. Every trail camera within a 50-mile radius had been activated. Every cabin, every hunting lodge, every remote structure was being monitored. Detective Harrison spread the updated case files across the hood of his vehicle. The evidence was overwhelming. The hidden laboratory journals detailed 42 years of systematic stalking and abduction. The victim profiles showed a disturbing pattern. Young adults, often traveling in small groups, always in remote locations. The predator had been refining his methods for decades, learning from each encounter, adapting his techniques. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic psychologist brought in from the State University, reviewed the behavioral analysis. This individual demonstrates extreme patience and long-term planning capabilities. The underground network we've uncovered suggests someone with significant resources and extensive knowledge of wilderness survival. The use of technology, social media monitoring, and elaborate deception indicates a highly intelligent and organized mind. The search teams moved methodically through the dense forest. K9 units had picked up multiple scent trails, but the predator's knowledge of the terrain made tracking difficult. He knew how to mask his movements, how to use natural barriers and water sources to confuse pursuit. Every false trail, every dead end, seemed calculated to waste time and resources. Agent Rodriguez coordinated the aerial surveillance. Thermal imaging drones swept the canopy, searching for heat signatures. The predator had evaded detection for decades, but the net was closing. Multiple states had joined the manhunt. Federal resources were being deployed. The extensive supply caches discovered across the region were being systematically compromised. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired park ranger contacted the tip line with information about suspicious activity near an abandoned fire tower. The location matched one of the coordinates found in the predator's journal. The tower had been decommissioned years ago, but recent photographs showed signs of habitation. Teams converged on the site as the sun reached its zenith. The fire tower stood 60 feet above the forest floor, its metal framework rusted but intact. At the base, investigators found evidence of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks, discarded food containers, and most importantly, surveillance equipment pointed toward the main hiking trails. Inside the tower's small cabin, the scene was chilling. Detailed maps covered every surface, marked with the movements of hikers and campers. Photographs of potential victims were pinned to the walls, some recent, some dating back years. A high-powered radio setup allowed monitoring of emergency frequencies and Park Service communications. Detective Morgan examined the computer equipment. The hard drives contained thousands of files, social media profiles, travel itineraries, personal information gathered over months of digital stalking. The predator had been using the tower as a command center, coordinating his activities across multiple states. The most disturbing discovery was a detailed timeline of future plans. The predator had identified potential victims for the next several months. Their photographs, travel plans, and personal details were meticulously documented. The operation had been planned to continue indefinitely. Agent Torres coordinated the perimeter. Radio chatter indicated movement in the forest below. The predator might still be in the area, possibly watching the investigation unfold. Every team member remained on high alert. This individual had demonstrated extreme cunning and violence. He would not be taken easily. The forensic team processed the scene with methodical precision. DNA samples were collected from every surface. Fingerprints were lifted from equipment and documents. The extensive evidence would take months to fully analyze, but the immediate priority was locating the predator before he could claim another victim. Dr. Chen studied the behavioral patterns revealed in the journals. The predator's psychological profile showed progressive escalation. Early entries focused on observation and fantasy. Later entries detailed increasingly violent encounters. The most recent entries suggested a complete break from reality, describing the victims as participants in some twisted game. The communication intercepts revealed another disturbing element. The predator had been monitoring law enforcement frequencies, staying ahead of search efforts. His knowledge of investigative procedures suggested either extensive research or possible law enforcement background. Every tactical decision had to account for his ability to anticipate police methods. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the search teams reported a significant discovery. 3 miles from the fire tower, hidden beneath a camouflaged shelter, they found the predator's main cache: weapons, ammunition, survival gear, and most importantly, evidence linking him to unsolved disappearances across the region. The cache contained detailed records of previous victims, names, dates, locations, and graphic descriptions of encounters. The scope of the crimes was staggering. Law enforcement agencies from multiple states would need to reopen dozens of cold cases. Families who had waited years for answers would finally learn the truth about their missing loved ones. Agent Martinez received an urgent radio transmission. A hunting party had spotted an individual matching the predator's description near a remote access road. The suspect was armed and moving toward a known escape route. All available units were redirected to establish a containment perimeter. The terrain was treacherous. Steep ravines, dense undergrowth, and unstable rock formations made pursuit dangerous. The predator knew these mountains intimately. Every ridge, every canyon, every hidden trail was part of his advantage. But the overwhelming force deployed against him was beginning to show results. Detective Harrison coordinated the tactical response. Rules of engagement were clear. The predator was considered extremely dangerous. He had demonstrated willingness to kill to avoid capture. Officers were authorized to use lethal force if necessary. The safety of the community took precedence over attempts to take him alive. The first visual contact came at 1700 hours. A sniper positioned on a distant ridge reported movement through his scope. The predator was moving along a game trail, carrying a large backpack and what appeared to be a rifle. He was heading toward a series of caves known to local hunters. The caves presented a tactical nightmare. Multiple entrances, interconnected passages, and numerous hiding places. If the predator reached the cave system, he could potentially evade capture for days or weeks. The decision was made to intercept him before he reached the caves. Teams moved swiftly through the forest. Radio silence was maintained to avoid detection. The predator's knowledge of law enforcement tactics meant any communication could be intercepted. Hand signals and predetermined positions guided the approach. The confrontation began without warning. The predator opened fire from a concealed position, forcing officers to take cover. His marksmanship was excellent, suggesting military or extensive hunting experience. Bullets struck trees and rocks inches from their positions. Agent Rodriguez flanked the position while other officers provided covering fire. The predator's muzzle flashes revealed his location behind a fallen log. The exchange of gunfire echoed through the forest, sending wildlife fleeing in all directions. The predator's position was untenable. Surrounded by superior numbers and firepower, he made a desperate attempt to escape. Breaking from cover, he ran toward the cave entrance, firing wildly to suppress pursuit. Officers maintained discipline, returning accurate fire while advancing on his position. The end came suddenly. Agent Martinez's shot struck the predator in the leg, sending him tumbling down a rocky slope. As officers closed in, the predator raised his weapon one final time. The synchronized response from multiple officers ended the threat permanently. The immediate aftermath was controlled chaos. Medical personnel confirmed the predator's death. The area was secured and processed for evidence. The backpack he carried contained additional weapons, survival gear, and a journal detailing his immediate plans. Dr. Chen examined the final journal entries. The predator's mental state had deteriorated significantly in recent weeks. The increased law enforcement pressure had pushed him toward increasingly desperate measures. The final entry, written just hours before his death, revealed plans for a final, violent confrontation. The forensic analysis would take months to complete. The predator's death ended the immediate threat, but the investigation would continue. Dozens of cold cases needed review. Families deserved answers. The extensive evidence would provide closure for victims across multiple states. Detective Harrison addressed the assembled task force. The community's response had been extraordinary. The cooperation between agencies, the dedication of volunteers, and the support of local residents had made the successful resolution possible. The predator's 40-year reign of terror was finally over. Agent Martinez reflected on the operation's success. The predator had been highly intelligent, well-prepared, and intimately familiar with the terrain. His survival skills and knowledge of law enforcement tactics had made him a formidable adversary. But the overwhelming response from the community and law enforcement had ultimately prevailed. The cleanup operation continued for days. The predator's various camps and caches were systematically dismantled. Evidence was cataloged and transported to forensic laboratories. The extensive documentation would provide investigators with a detailed timeline of crimes spanning 4 decades. Dr. Chen compiled her final behavioral analysis. The predator represented a unique case study in criminal psychology. His ability to maintain his activities for such an extended period while avoiding detection demonstrated exceptional planning and self-control. The psychological profile would be studied by law enforcement agencies nationwide. The community began the healing process. Families of victims found closure in knowing their loved one's fate. The fear that had gripped the region for decades was finally lifted. Memorial services were held for those who had lost their lives. The courage of those who had survived was celebrated. The investigation's success became a model for future operations. The coordination between agencies, the use of technology, and the community involvement demonstrated how complex cases could be resolved through collaborative effort. Training programs were developed to share the lessons learned. Agent Rodriguez reviewed the extensive evidence recovered from the predator's various locations. The meticulous documentation of his crimes provided unprecedented insight into the mind of a serial predator. The evidence would be used to train future investigators and help prevent similar crimes. The predator's death marked the end of one of the longest-running criminal investigations in the region's history. 4 decades of terror had been brought to a close through the combined efforts of law enforcement, the community, and the survivors who refused to give up hope. Detective Harrison stood at the edge of the forest where the final confrontation had taken place. The wilderness that had provided sanctuary for a predator had also become his final resting place. The mountains would remember this day when justice finally prevailed over evil. The case files were closed, but the memory of the investigation would endure. The dedication of those who pursued justice, the courage of those who survived, and the resilience of the community would be remembered long after the evidence was filed away. The forest was quiet now, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for decades. The threat was gone, the predator defeated. But the vigilance would continue. The community had learned that evil could hide in plain sight, that danger could lurk in the most beautiful places. As the sun set over the mountains, Agent Martinez made his final report. The predator who had terrorized the region for 40 years was dead. The investigation that had consumed countless hours and resources was complete. The community could finally rest, knowing that justice had been served. The drone footage that had started the investigation was archived as evidence. The four friends who had vanished in 1990 would be remembered not as victims, but as the catalyst that brought down a predator. Their disappearance had ultimately led to justice for dozens of other victims. The thermal imaging that had captured the predator's final moments would be studied by law enforcement agencies worldwide. The technology that had revealed his hidden world would be used to prevent future crimes. The investigation had shown that no predator, however skilled, could evade justice forever. The case was closed, but the story would continue. The survivors would heal, the community would rebuild, and the lessons learned would prevent future tragedies. The predator's legacy of terror had been replaced by a legacy of justice, courage, and hope. The mountains stood silent, their secrets finally revealed. The wilderness that had harbored evil for so long was cleansed. The community that had lived in fear could finally breathe freely. The investigation was over, but the memory of those who fought for justice would endure forever.